Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to today's webinar, No Time to Lose, Women's Leadership in a World on Fire. My name is Meredith Davis, and I'm the Manager of Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning here at the Coady Institute. And we're so excited to have you joining us from all parts of the globe to learn and share together during International Women's Week. Before we dive into this discussion, it's our practice here at Coady Institute to pause and take some time at the beginning of a gathering to reflect on the history of the land that we live and work on. We acknowledge the people who have cared for this land for thousands of years before colonization and who continue to care for this land today. We also acknowledge that here in Canada, as in many parts of the world, the history of the land and the treatment of Indigenous people is marked by injustice and oppression, which continue in various forms today. I myself am new to Coady Institute and the area where it's located, and therefore am early in my journey of learning about the Indigenous people of this area. Coady is situated on the lands of Mi'kma'ki, home to the Mi'kmaq people. I recently learned that the name Antigonish, which is the town where Coady Institute is located, is drawn from the Mi'kmaq word Naligitchgiunitchk, meaning the place where the branches are torn off. In a few months, Indigenous women leaders will be gathering together at Coady Institute to begin the Indigenous Women in Community Leadership Program. This program is developed and led by Indigenous facilitators, program staff, and elders, and it's focused on supporting Indigenous women leaders to bring about the changes they want for themselves and their communities. We have so much to learn from the ways in which these leaders and other women leaders from around the globe care for and support their communities with courage and love in the face of great obstacles. I'd like to go over a few technical details to ensure this event moves along as smoothly as possible. We'll be spending time together all here as a group in this main room, and also we'll be moving into breakout groups for some discussion. So in this main room, we won't have access to our microphones, just to make sure the sound quality is good for everybody with so many joining. But we do welcome you to share comments or appreciations in the chat. And when we move into breakout rooms, our microphones will be activated at that time, and we encourage all of you to share as you feel comfortable. We also want to recognize that many of you will be observing Ramadan and that this event might fall at the time of iftar. So we're especially grateful to you for taking the time to be here. And now, without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce Coady Institute's Executive Director, Eileen Alma, who will be guiding today's event.
Thank you so much, Meredith, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. I just want to make sure everybody can see a full picture on their screen, perhaps beside me in a smaller box. Brian, is that what you're seeing right now?
That's correct.
And Meredith, if one of you can just tell me.
We're seeing the presentation, but it's not in presenter mode right now.
We don't want that.
Okay, great.
Thank you. I will just try to fix it the way it needs to be fixed. 1 second, everybody. Okay, I hope that works out better. If somebody can just let me know.
That's
because
great.
Thank you. It's just at this stage, it's hard for me to see you at the same time. So if you do have any questions or comments, I encourage you to put them in the chat, and one of my colleagues will help to monitor that. So hello, everybody. My name is Eileen Alma, and I'm the director of the Coady Institute. I've had the privilege of working at Coady now for 13 years. Many of you will remember me as the director of the International Center for Women's Leadership before I moved into the role of executive director in 2022. It's my absolute pleasure to lead this kind of conversation today. And I think the timing is absolutely imperative for us to have a conversation. And the fact that so many of you have registered to be part of the webinar today speaks to, I think, the real interest in moving a conversation forward. The very first question that I would have to ask of all of us is really, is the world on fire? And I would say that metaphorically, increasingly, yes. Literally, yes, in some places the world is on fire. Maybe the whole world is not right now burning, but we know that given recent events, particularly in the Middle East, things are looking really dire. And structurally, we are absolutely stranged. And what a lot of researchers are saying now is that this is a convergence of crises. We've got, on the one hand, climate surging at levels that we've never seen in decades, and rule of law is often being abandoned. We have climate emergencies accelerating dangerously. We have humanitarian crises that are expanding and deepening. We have misinformation and societal polarizations that are destabilizing societies around the world and particularly damaging democracies. And, altogether, environmental, technological, and political challenges are all coming together at a very concerning pace. So yes, we are at a point that I think is unprecedented. And it seems like every few years we're saying something like this. It's not that long ago that we were going through a crisis with the pandemic. But this particularly right now strikes me as being a really major inflection point where the world is just, you know, facing so many challenges all at once, and it's difficult to know where to begin or what will be the right solutions, given that the complexity of those converging issues are so great. So just to move forward, I will go to the next slide. I want to address this right away from the outset, because when I organize meetings like this, I often get comments about, well, why aren't we focusing on men? Why always are we focusing in on women? And why is women's leadership so critical? Well, let me address that in a couple ways. Let me first provide you with just a couple statistics, and there's way more that I could be pulling out, and I can share with you if that's of interest. But let's just look at some very high level statistics here. Right now, in this world, in 2026, there are only 13 female heads of government out of 193 UN member states. 13 out of 193 heads of government, and only 15 heads of state out of 193 UN member states. So that's 28 out of 193. And we're at a critical moment in the world. Now that's at the highest level, and it's reflecting state numbers. And if you work your way down sort of a vertical sort of trajectory of formal roles, political roles in particular, you see the numbers of women increasing. But even there, the numbers are still far below where we really need to see them. If you look at it, just some statistics from corporations, I'm going to focus on a number for here in Canada, because Canada, you all often would think that we're doing so well overall, that we've had, a feminist policy for several years as part of our government's mandate, which, by the way, that's shifting right now. But in Canada, only 3% of women in the top 100 Canadian publicly traded companies, only 3% were women. Actually, it's 3 women out of 100 companies. And actually, it's even more dire than that, because there's numbers that show that there's anywhere between 3 and 5 women of a study that was done of 527 named executive officers. So that's far, far below where we probably should be seeing numbers in the corporate world. And it's only a fraction of the 12.5% of women that we're seeing holding any kind of leadership, executive leadership space in just in businesses in Canada. And if that's the case in Canada, you can only imagine what we would be seeing around the world. So why focus on women? Well, the whole point of this is not to exclude men. It's that we need to include women, and that's why we're focusing here. Women, I'm not telling the women on this call right now anything they don't already know. We face systemic obstacles that men just don't. We have proven leadership, and yet it's being left unused around the world. And we know that societies with higher women's representation are more peaceful, equitable, and economic resilience. So let's go into that just a little bit now. This is a picture that I took some years ago in Indonesia of women's cooperatives and self-help groups that were working in their local communities. I often talk about how women are, the backbone of communities. They stabilize communities in ways that we just don't see represented with male counterparts. Research has shown that women are often the first responders when it comes to conflict zones. They are the first to look for food and shelter and health services and community protection. And there was a study that was done by CARE International in 2024 that shows that 91% of more than 13,000 women across 15 conflict-affected countries took active leadership roles in their community survival and recovery. So while we're not necessarily seeing women at the top echelons of political leadership, what we do know is that it is women that are driving social, economic, and community well-being forward. And in spaces like conflict-affected countries, women often become the breadwinners, and they create safety networks, and they diversify income sources to keep not themselves necessarily, but to keep their families and their communities afloat. So when we have political polarization, like what we're seeing right now around the world, these people, these women are community level stabilizers, and they help to prevent societies from fracturing even further. The second point I'd like to make is that women's inclusion has been proven to lead to longer lasting peace agreements. And part of the UN's Women, Peace and Security agenda has shown this, as well as research that's been done by the Carnegie Corporation. They found that women's participation increases the probability of a peace agreement lasting 2 years by 20% and 15 years by 35%. Moreover, negotiations that meaningfully involve women, are more likely to reach agreement and produce comprehensive and community-oriented outcomes. In other words, without women's engagement, often what can happen is that durable agreements, there is no durable agreement. There's the potential for relapse into violence and further longer term instability. The picture that's on your screen right now is an example of women leaders in Liberia, and many of us refer back to the success of the women's movement in Liberia. This picture comes from the Ellen Johnson Sirleaf Foundation in Liberia, who recently celebrated 20 years of the Accra Peace Agreement, in which women were at the forefront of the peace agreement and the actions. The third point I'd like to say is that women often serve as bridge builders in polarized society. So even where we have the most protracted conflict, we still see over and over again women trying to bring together groups that are on dialectically opposed positions and find ways for peace to move forward. Some of our focus, of course, in those spaces are around meeting and advocating for peace and addressing and reducing ongoing violence. But it's clear from the examples, and I can think of a couple of examples just in Israel and Palestine alone, where the work has illustrated that they continue to be more willing to engage in dialogue across political, religious, ethnic, ideological divides, which is essential in times of polarization. It's not easy, and every time something happens, of course, it feels like a setback, but they still persist, and they still try to de-escalate. I'm thinking a little bit about research that I was recently looking at that have been done by scholars in Northern Ireland, and one of them is Teresa O'Keefe, and she wrote an article in 2021 that really looked at bridge building feminism as a category and the ways in which peace building was front and center in feminist movements and feminist activism. The challenge there is to make sure that even as we're building peace, we're not necessarily compromising on the importance of equity and inclusion in all of the work we do. And she makes that point quite a lot in one of her articles from 2021. I will also say here that women strengthen democratic governance and they reduce polarization. This is a picture I took in 2022 when I happened to be in Ethiopia, and we were celebrating the 25th anniversary of one of our partners, the Women in Self-Employment Organizing, or WISE. And in the middle, beside me, the petite woman was at the time the president of Ethiopia, who herself, she was pushing for gender equality. She was pushing for reducing polarization in the country. Sadly, she's no longer the president, and that just goes to show you that we had a missed opportunity here of strengthening something very important in Ethiopia. Women leaders do tend to emphasize collaboration and transparency and inclusion, which are essential for counterizing polarized interests in politics. So one of those, again, the focus of women in governance spaces, in democracies in particular, means that we are looking at the consideration of more well-rounded, healthy societies that include all. So women's leadership within all of this is not just a moral imperative, it's a strategic necessity. In the era that we are in, because we strengthen community resilience, because we make peace agreements more durable, because we focus in on human security needs that are often overlooked when you're in the height of crisis, because we bridge divides across fragmented societies. We look at what are the specific gendered harms of war, and we improve governance and institutional support. At the same time, we continue to have these major challenges in front of us. And I'm just going to reflect on the community level for women leaders. Again, not things that we are not aware of. Personal security threats when we are in leadership spaces, that rising conflict and violence that puts us often at danger. Resource constraints and funding cuts, and this is happening right now in unprecedented ways globally and locally for many of us, as if we didn't already have those constraints when pushing forward for gender equality. We are continue to be excluded from decision-making structures. And we have all kinds of other social and economic pressures that we face individually and collectively. The other two are pretty self-explanatory, but I do want to flag at the end of this, I've listed emotional and physical burnout, and that is because for many of us, the work that we do is hard work. It's work that we do because we feel that there's a moral imperative to do it. It's not just a job, but it's a calling. And yet when we aren't able to take care of ourselves in all of this, and the challenges just keep rolling and rolling, it's very difficult to maintain a level of energy, either individually or collectively at times. So these continue to be some of the things that we face. And yet, we have many strategies that women are using to move forward. And some of these are listed here on the screen for you. I will try to keep it short because we want to get to conversation, and I really want to be able to hear in the groups you discussing some of the strategies you're using. But let's put some of these on the table here. We are building powerful networks to increase our access and visibility and our institutional influence. We're doing it together, right? We're connecting where we can. We're formalizing leadership communities. We're building in sector-specific clusters, and we're also increasingly doing some very innovative work around investment collectives that give us faster access to resources and decision-making spaces. So these are important networks that help to create social proof at scale, right, and reduce perceived risks where those have been identified. It's especially important as we're facing exclusion and funding cuts because, there's always this tendency to say we can do less with more. And, unfortunately, that's becoming a real problem the more and more we get things cut back. And there's an expectation we can do all of it, just voluntarily. And we indeed do so much of it voluntarily. But we need to be creating our own pathways. And this is what I see in really powerful examples of networks around me. We address over and over again, and I've alluded to this before, real world barriers, especially at the community level, things like housing and childcare and transportation. We put a lot of energy into building on small wins to create bigger wins in those respects. We are increasingly looking at how do we build coalitions that counter backlash and protect activists. And some of the colleagues that are on this call today, I know, are proud human rights defenders and often put themselves at risk in order to protect others. We look at a more holistic approach to economic empowerment. And, we hear a lot about women's economic empowerment in particular, in many different frames, but none of that can really be effective if we're not looking at how we integrate other things with it. So looking at the social structures that are around us that enable everybody in a society to feel like they can really focus in on their economic and social well-being. Looking at how we take projects and programs and not just talk about economic empowerment, but we also build in peace building. We also address sexual and gender-based violence. We also transform local conflict dynamics. Doing this together rather than looking at these as siloed initiatives is incredibly important. We develop service models that help to survive the funding cuts, which I mentioned before. And again, we have plenty of examples over decades of where the funding that we've received to do some of the work we do is a pitiful amount compared to what is spent in other places like war and defense and security, just as it's being done right now in countries around the world. And we've been looking closely together at community development frameworks that ensure that there's collective work, collective looking at inclusion, looking at equity, and also looking at where it's appropriate, reconciliation and recovery. Those are some of the things that we are doing, and I think doing quite well, and we need to amplify the successes and the challenges of that work. These are some of the examples that I was looking at more closely as of late. You can find more information about them online in different places. I will just elaborate on where these come from, and why I thought they were useful to consider. The entrepreneurship pipeline that's noted around in Ukraine, it's part of a Ukraine Women's Fund, and they're helping to train internally displaced women to restart or relocate enterprises and build local business support hubs. And they're doing all of that with the continuation of conflict happening. The work that's being done in Sudan, women have been at the forefront of Sudanese negotiations for quite some time. And one of the things that they're very interested in continuing to do is to ensure that, you know, a coalition of women-led organizations that had drafted the Kampala Feminist Declaration, that though that information and that representation continues to be pushed into the peace processes, and as part of technical committees moving forward. And in addition to that, they're also doing a lot of work on frontline solutions and service integration. So those are just two of the examples there, but you can see that there's, you know, similarly initiatives that are you can find that are happening in Mali, and in Nigeria and in Colombia around territorial peace tables. All of these are recent examples, and you know, they are, I would say, probably quite parallel to many things that you on this call may have been seeing in your own communities. What they have in common is three things: their design, the leverage, and inclusion. Ensuring that with the design, as I was saying earlier, it's looking at integration of several things rather than looking at separate work streams or silos. That there's collective structures that women are pooling together to ensure legitimacy of their grassroots, for example, networks, and pushing that into system level power. And they're ensuring inclusion. And when I talk about inclusion, if people, if women and other historically underrepresented or oppressed groups are not at tables, they're breaking the tables and they're creating new ones, which is exciting. From Coady, I just want to mention a few examples. And again, mindful of time, I'm going to rush through it a little bit. But one of our major programs that's coming to an end this month, I hope will lead to further really exciting initiatives and phases of work. But the program is called Engage Women Empowerment and Active Citizenship, and it involves 5 country partners in it. One from India, one from Ethiopia, one from Tanzania, one from Bangladesh, and one from Haiti. And while those are all very distinct countries, what they're doing that's really exciting is they're really working a lot with informal sector leaders from an economic and from a political and from an environmental space, and thinking through innovations that can not just help them, but the ways that they can also lead capacity strengthening between and among them, country to country. And so what we're seeing is, you know, best practices and successes around looking at climate smart agriculture being, you know, information being shared from one country like Bangladesh or India and shared alongside groups in Tanzania and Ethiopia, and vice versa. And while contexts are different, they're exploring also where women's leadership is in that, and how they can also support and help women leaders move forward. We also have some other really interesting work that's happening. One is a brand new project in Nepal and Bangladesh that's looking at women's leadership as a collective practice. And here I'm also talking about political leadership, but how we're supporting women from the ground by mobilizing communities and building coalitions and reshaping how decisions are made by women in these conflict-affected contexts. And I say conflict-affected because we never would have expected when we started this project that both Bangladesh and Nepal would move through some very dramatic movements to a shift in governance, both positive and in sometimes negative instances. So where women are in that, I think, is extremely important, and the project is very timely. Finally, I'll make a point here about our women's Coady Circle of Abundance Indigenous program, which has a real focus in on Indigenous women and community leadership. And that program has been going on since 2011. And I'm so in awe of the women, the Indigenous women from across Turtle Island, which is essentially what many of you globally would know as North America, or territory in North America. These women are revitalizing their own governance practices in Indigenous communities. They're leading wellness initiatives. They're leading economic development programs, particularly for women, but also beyond that for whole communities to benefit. And they're very much focused in here on the understanding of what already communities have, communities have in abundance, the strengths and the assets that are contained in those Indigenous communities, rather than from a negative development top-down needs-based approach. And that is a strength that I think they have been doing that's something that they've been doing since time immemorial. And we in turn are learning more and more from Indigenous communities, whether those are here on Turtle Island or they're around the world, about how we can get that fire out in this world. Here's just a sample for those of you that are in Canada of other things that are happening in Canada right now that I think are notable and commendable, that help to move gender equality forward, including, and many of us have been working with what we call GBA or GBA plus for quite a long time. And lately, the Women and Gender Equality Department of Canadian government is really looking at the modernization and the improvements around gender-based analysis, which I think is important, and which also needs to be really very much focused in on an intersectional approach, looking at all of the identities that comprise us, and ensure that we are, again, addressing equity and inclusion as a primary area of focus. So those are just a few examples. I'm going to stop there because in the interest of time, but those are easily found online. And none of those are necessarily global Coady initiatives. However, they're ones that I admire that I think are worth checking out. So here's where we're going to now stop my talking and allow you some space for reflection. I ask you in this short presentation, do these challenges resonate for women's leadership for the world that we're in right now? And what would you add? More importantly, what are the strategies that you've been using that you think you would like to share that are also things that people might be interested in modeling? And in your groups, I hope you will, some of that will emerge. And finally, the third question here, and this is also a very an important one for me in an organization that is an educational institution that is meant to support local leaders and community development. What are the things that you feel at this moment now that women leaders need in supports that take us, that build up our strength? Or what kind of education do you think is necessary to continue to give us more momentum? So with that, I want to just share with you that I'm not alone on this call today. Brian will be opening up the different working groups that we've set up because there's such a high number of people on the call. And I'm joined today by some individuals that I'd like to introduce. So maybe what I'll do is I'll just stop sharing my screen. if I can figure out how to do that. There is a button that says stop share. So here we are. Thank you. There's some amazing women. And of course, there's also Brian, an amazing man in the background. These amazing women are going to help be conversation navigators. And I'd like to introduce them one by one. Julia Baniak, who is a St. FX graduate, and she's currently working with the Coady Institute, supporting and coordinating in our Circle of Abundance Indigenous Women's Leadership program. I'm very excited that Julia is here with us today, despite the fact that she's across the country and it's a very early morning. Thank you, Julia. Salome Nduda from Kenya, who is a Coady graduate and is also a human rights defender in Kenya, doing incredible work there in defense of not just women and girls, but his other oppressed and at-risk community members. Saliwe Matetwa, sorry, Saliwe, I never say your name quite right, from Zimbabwe, who again is a Coady graduate and working with women's networks through her organization, Natalia Women's Network, I believe is the name. Hina Shazadi, who is a Coady graduate and also is a new Coady staff member, our manager for the Center for Women's Leadership and the Engage program, and originally from Pakistan, but now in Canada, a Canadian citizen, and she's joining us today. Jaya Luntel from Nepal, the founder and chairperson for the Story Kitchen, working with survivors of conflict in Nepal and helping to amplify their stories, amongst many other things that she does along the side. And who am I missing now? Of course, Meredith Davis. Meredith, who recently joined Coady this past year, who is a monitoring, evaluation, and learning specialist, and another guru and amazing woman leader that we've come to count on very quickly at the Coady. So with these women, we will be breaking into groups and they will be helping you with the questions. We will take about 30 minutes and then we will come back and I have some others. We want to have a bit of reflection back, and I also have some other things I'd like to share towards the end of the call. So without further ado, we'll break into the groups now. Okay, thank you, everybody. I want to thank everybody for, I think, a very interesting set of conversations. I'm just wondering with my my coordinators and navigators here, if anybody wanted to share a key sort of point that emerged from your group, or if there was somebody from your group that would like to share something. If we can take just a couple minutes, we won't have a lot of time, but a couple minutes to share what was really interesting about the breakout group discussion. I'll just go to Jaya to start with, since you're, I think, further east than everybody, Jaya. Was there somebody from your group that, or are you going to speak on behalf of your group?
Hi, Eileen. From our group, that the discussion was really interesting. Sienna, Rachel, Jason will share some of the reflection from our group.
Yeah, we had a great discussion with our group, and I thank everyone for speaking, and those that were able to just take in some information. We talked a lot about the fact that we've hit a bit of a critical point, and we're trying to maintain hope in a sea of a lot of hopelessness around us. Folks around us may seem unaware of what's going on in the world, and we're trying to mobilize them, kind of thing. The term democratic backsliding was used quite a bit, and how we thought, we had made all of these gains as women, and particularly for BIPOC women. And we're not only backsliding to where we were, we're actually losing ground, which is quite concerning. Did you want me to go into some of the second and third questions, or just stick with the first one?
I'd say just give us a quick taste on the second or third, whatever you think is most pertinent, since we've got such a short amount of time, and I know we're not doing it. We're doing a disservice, but I apologize.
Yeah. So our big thing was, there's a lot of fear and uncertainty because we didn't expect to be in this position. So we're not really sure what to do, but some of the folks around the world are finding a lot of strength in bringing youth into their groups and bringing men into the conversation with women, you know, helping to elevate our voices and those sorts of things in conversations where we may not have the seat at the table. There was a really great phrase that Jaya said, to reawaken the urgency in women to create critical mass at this time. So yeah, that's a quick shot from us.
Thank you so much. Those are excellent points. And I will turn to Sharon next. Sharon, if you want to open your mic.
Yeah, thank you very much. For group 5, we had about 5 people who spoke. The issues were very similar. We had speakers from Sierra Leone, from Chile, from Ethiopia, 2 from Ethiopia and 1 from Uganda. And we have issues including misappropriation of funds that are supposed to be used for the development of women. We have instability in governance. And that is a general thing across the space. That was a point from Chile. We had security issues from Ethiopia, and of course, the same is peculiar in Nigeria as well. We have mass illiteracy also from Ethiopia and from Uganda. And the question 2, we found that there are now discoveries around the resources that are not well shared, funds that are misappropriated, and things like that. So people are beginning to ask questions about these things. To solve the problems, we are suggesting more of academic training and vocational training to bring more women into leadership spaces and to bring more women into government. Of course, Uganda seemed to have more success story in terms of their affirmative action and additional seats in the parliament. But beyond that, people from Ethiopia are suggesting that we should also encourage men to understand the reason why they have to support women in leadership and to not exclude the people living with disabilities. And of course, we also had the point on accountability checks. That'll be all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Excellent points also. And, you know, the accountability checks, you know, thinking about how we increase and mobilize collectively and share responsibility amongst ourselves to move our communities forward. But at the same time, think about the transparency and accountability that needs to happen in governance structures is absolutely essential. And I appreciate the sharing that, you know, a lot of women have tremendous experience and expertise, and we hunger for more. And I think that's the reason why so many of us come, you know, to organizations like Coady and others, where we say we want to be better. And I often reflect back with women on whether men would equally do the same in terms of really interrogating their own leadership. And it's a question we have to ask. And again, we don't need to make generalizations about men, because there are a number of amazing men that are strong leaders that are advocating for the same things we are. But it's interesting to see just how much women continue to want to build their skill, build up their capacities to address the challenges that are in front of them. I'm going to turn now to Mwajuma. I hope I said your name right, Mwajuma. If you'd like to speak, if you can take your mic off. Yeah, on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm here to speak on behalf of Group Loom 6, and we had an interesting discussions. From question 1, we said that non-profit projects whereby women perform a lot of non-profit projects, which limit them from engaging in leadership. Also, male-dominated sectors such as energy and transportation, which has also led to the limited of women in leadership. Care burden, especially to young women, where most of the young women are performing workload, especially in homes, taking care of the family and other activities which limit them to perform on leadership. And the last is fear, whereby they are not capable of engaging in leadership by fearing that maybe they will lose and be ashamed in the community after losing when they contest for leadership. And for the second questions, it was about mentorship, also empowerment, education for concerning on leadership, also confidence building to the young women who are willing to engage in leadership, and also to have soft skills development whereby they can be capable on engaging in leadership. And for the last question, we discussed a lot of them. Maybe I can mention them without explain them. First was transformative leadership, also to have a safe house for women to bring together where they can share, maybe like a safe space whereby women, they can speak what they're facing when they especially to those women who are leaders. Also to building supportive network that allow them for sharing their skills and knowledge. Grassroots leadership, they said that we can have grassroots leadership training, especially to those women who are in grassroots level, those that they can be able to engage in leadership, and also funding and space to allow women. Here I can speak about economic empowerment. As we can see, being a leader, especially in Tanzania, you're supposed to have the money, because you can't be a reader without money, because when you want to be a reader, you're supposed to pay for a form which allowed you to be a reader. So the last is funding and space. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was quite the list, and there's a lot there that I know Coady is interested in supporting, but also I'm sure there are many other friends and leaders on this call that are also in spaces of mentorship and offering educational opportunities. So this is great. Tizete, if I got your name right, did you want to unmute and share your reflections for your group?
Yes, thank you. For our group, we had, for the first question, we had contributions from a number of participants, and I'll just list them due to time.
Mm-hmm.
One of them shared about her community being male dominated. So in order to be able to emerge as a woman leader, she started something in her department, and now she has grown. So she had to take the bull by the horn because her community did not permit that. And another contribution was she mentioned the fact that women are challenged at the domestic level. So we have to handle it from there so that we harmonize intergenerational level between the youth and the senior people, to try to have an intergenerational dialogue that will enhance women's leadership. And for question 2, we mostly mentioned about how to bridge the gap between the theory and the sustainability in our communities. And a lot was said also about mentoring, mentoring and capacity building, and the use of men engagement, that's bringing men to the table to discuss on how to mitigate the challenges that women face in their community, making them to understand that women are not they are not threats, but they are allies, they are complements in helping the community to grow. So in a short note, that's what our group discussed for question 1 and 2. Thank you, and over.
Thank you very much, Tizete. I know that I'm just actually looking at the time. We still have time. Am I right, Brian? We're still doing okay? Okay, I just had a bit of a panic thinking we ran out of the time, but I'm realizing we're actually doing well with time. So thank you. Who have I missed so far? Saliwe, may I ask you if there's you or somebody from our group that would like to share some key points, if particularly anything you haven't heard yet?
Thank you so much, Eileen. I can share, I think, from our group, I think what really resonated with me from the points that I haven't heard is the issue of migration, particularly as we are going through, there's talk about mentorship, upbringing of the younger leaders, and also including the young people. But then our group spoke at length about two forms of migration that we are seeing in the young women. There's the forced migration through trafficking, and then there's migration by choice for economic security. But then also that the conversations around even the migration by choice do not actually include the weight of that decision and what it does to the young leaders in terms of building your community, in terms of settling in a different culture, different community, so far from where you were brought up. So that's one of the issues that we raised, that as we are trying to bring up the next generation of leaders, there are certain issues that also need to be taken care of to look into the issue of migration. I also heard when we spoke about male engagement, there was the issue of currently the burden of explaining and everything rests with the women. It's as if we need to bring in the men and explain why women need to have a voice. So we need to shift this burden to male champions so that, we don't need to justify our existence and our needs and everything that happens around building the women's movement. So male champions should be groomed who represent women in these conversations and at these platforms, decision-making platforms particularly. And so just in summary, that, you really need to amplify women's voices. I think, even looking at the conversation that's going around, the minute you switch on the news, there's all this turmoil that's happening in the Middle East. But where are the voices of the women? Where are the voices of the children and the underrepresented in what's going on? It's as if they're faceless or they don't exist. So we need to amplify women's voices and build movements that go beyond our borders.
Thank you so much, Saliwe. Great points. And we did talk also about the ongoing need to decolonize or to address forms of colonization everywhere that we are living, and ensuring that as part of the education that we are also taking responsibility for our own education, particularly if we are not Indigenous, and ensuring that we are moving forward in a good way to ensure equity, inclusion, and to reflect and honor the fact that actually Indigenous leaders, particularly women, that actually know how to get the fire out in some cases in this world and have been doing so since time immemorial. So just to reflect that as well. Julia, over to you. Is there anybody from your group, or would you like to speak on behalf of your group?
I don't think anybody from our group wants to speak, but we had a lot of good conversations. I think there might be a couple questions that might come through in the end as well that came through. But we had lots of experience from the Caribbean to Canada. Someone from the United States also spoke and just shared a little bit about issues we are currently facing that were really insightful and unique each to themselves and to our regions. But I think the commonality was all across the board that we shared. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Julia. Have I missed anybody or any group? Meredith, I missed your group. Is it you or somebody from your group?
Yeah, nobody volunteered to share, so I'll give a little report back on some things that haven't been mentioned yet. One was about the idea in terms of challenges that resonate was around degradation of natural resources and the need for women's participation in management of those resources. And there was a specific example around mining in Sierra Leone and how that's causing issues around agricultural land. Challenges with women being afraid to speak up and needing to support women to do so, especially around issues of gender-based violence and harm, so that we can find solutions to those issues. There was also a discussion or a point around social media and how that's in some ways bringing us closer together, but also that it isn't always, it presents sort of certain sides, and maybe it can have challenges in terms of honest communication around the issues that are needed. And there were some great examples shared about networks. So example in Zambia around a female network for women in higher learning and how that's leading to women taking up leadership positions. And then in Sierra Leone, the Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Act, so through policy, that had a 30% quota for women in all areas of work, and how that's a tool that leaders there are using to promote women's leadership.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Meredith. Thank you to all the groups. I just want to make sure I didn't miss anybody in terms of the groups, but also reflecting on the fact that there's probably a lot of questions or comments in the chat that we need to also look through. And I encourage my colleagues in the panels to see if there's anything that really should be raised or hasn't been raised that we would like to draw attention to. I'm seeing a couple questions, and before I continue with some further conversation, I'll just take a look at them and see if I can answer, or if somebody else on the team of experts can answer. An anonymous attendee says here that one of the biggest, if not the biggest, crises facing humanities currently is the climate crisis. And do you have any key learning or recommendations on women's leadership in climate action or in conservation of biodiversity, and specifically Indigenous women's leadership? Thank you for that question. I would like to say that one of the things that I'm very proud of is the work that we are currently doing together with partners in 3 countries, Tanzania, Ethiopia, and Kenya, around feminist agroecology, as a matter of fact. It's a program called Rural Women Cultivating Change. And one of a couple of my colleagues who may be on the call or maybe listening in are responsible for providing support on that project. And the project is also led by a good partner of ours named Seed Change, and it involves Pelham. It involves uniquely in those 3 countries a mix of organizations at the civil society level that are involved in the technical aspects of looking at agroecology and looking at biodiversity and looking at seed systems and food security, but also connected with work that's being done by women's rights organizations in those same countries, and pairing up with them to really promote and advance the work collectively, and of in particular highlighting and supporting women farmers in those 3 countries. And in addition to that, what is an important component of it is the policy level recommendations that are emerging from the project and that are feeding into systems. So that's an example of some of the work we're doing, underscoring it and what makes it maybe unique. And this is where I go back to thinking about not just putting different topics in silos or in different categories, but bringing them together and looking at things holistically. And an important pillar and component of the work is addressing gender-based violence. So yes, it's a focus on climate and on food systems and food security. Yes, it's a focus on women's empowerment, both economically and socially. But it's also at the same time addressing gender-based violence at the community level. That's the kind of work we need to be pushing for. And certainly when we have funders that are investing in our work, we need to push them to think beyond their usual project boundaries to be making those connections. So that's an example. And, certainly what we would like to do is ensure that as resources are produced, that's the kind of thing we make available together with the lead partner Seed Change, as well as all the local partners. Capital access through coordinated women's networks. Can I give you an example? I will pull it up and I will, if I can't find it right away, I will, actually, I did find it. There's a piece here that I will just say that is a 2026 analysis around formal communities and sector clusters and investment collectives coming together to coordinate and support networks. One of the examples that I would sort of put on the table right now is the Equality Fund, which is based in Canada and which is meant to help to ensure that seed funding goes right to the women-led organizations that need the funding the most. And it started with a commitment from the Canadian government some years back, but it never stopped there. It was about bringing together a collective investment from private sector, from other philanthropy together to reduce a single investor sort of process, and to ensure also that the money is invested and then is perpetuated year over year through endowments and other giving. I think that's a very exciting example of taking gender equality and the investment in gender equality into our own hands as a women's movement. And, I'm commending that work. And we need more of that, whether it's through Global Fund for Women or for other, regional resources. I can think of several good examples where that's happening. But also, I think even amongst us, and what I'm very interested in doing is harnessing the potential of our alumni network to say, what is the trust collective that we build together to ensure that we can pay it forward, that we can help that next generation of young women be part of something, and going forward to also, to really engage with one another. So that's some examples. I don't know if I'm giving you enough, but it's something that is reflecting, I think, what I'm seeing in the questions here. I'm just going to jump down to the Hawassa reality and intervention. You're speaking from Ethiopia and Hawassa, and you see this gap between the burning reality and leadership theory. And, the paper solutions are, as you said here, being outpaced by actual survival crises. This is Kasim speaking. I'm writing it here, and we're not moving ahead. How do we move beyond project-based leadership that dies when the funding stops? And what are your ideas for building systemic resilience? Kasim, thank you for that question. Let me give you a response from me, and I'm sure that others on the call might have some thoughts as well that they could put into the chat. And I'm going to speak specifically about Ethiopia now, because I have a very real example of, of us addressing this issue of another project's coming to an end. How do we keep things moving forward? How do we deal with the fact that funding is drying up? No matter where we are in the world, where it's getting harder and harder to come by, and individual philanthropy is also getting challenging. One thing that I see in Ethiopia that is exciting to me is that organizations that we've worked with and alumni that we've worked with in Coady have themselves generated a network focused on ABCD. And for those of you that are not familiar, ABCD means asset-based and community-driven development, whereby we are supporting communities to be drivers of their own agendas and to understand the assets that they have already in the community, not the deficits. Because too often, especially when we talk about development, we're talking about deficit models and needs-based approach. And what has been created in Ethiopia is a network of interested parties, whether they're individuals or their organizations, coming together saying, we need to continue to build this at the community level from the ground up, to put communities in the driver's seat on where they need to see things happen. And we know that at the end of the day, when conflict is happening, and as it is in many parts of Ethiopia, there's still communities are still the ones trying to figure out how to move ahead, how to take a very abnormal situation and still ensure that that people are surviving if they're not thriving. And I think that that movement goes beyond projects, and it really is about a process of just emergence of your own community, if to call it that, and pushing that forward. And yeah, I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying that there's no resources that are ever needed, but I'm really happy to see that it's going beyond just the projectization. It's going beyond the competitiveness around projectization, and it's really looking at a collaborative model. And we have to be prepared to try to do that. Even when we're in a world right now that is about power and about holding on to power at every cost. How do we build that at least at the local level, so we're pushing back on and showing an alternative model of collaboration? Okay, so that's just a couple more points that I'm seeing here is that there was one of the discussions in the group about the lack of mentorship from women leaders. And it came about how does women look or seek mentorship. If I can share with you a couple thoughts. Women seeking mentorship from men. You know what? I don't disagree with you. Some of the people that really mentored me were men, actually, in my career, and were not just men, but they were champions. And part of it is that I didn't necessarily see the leadership models or recognize the leadership models that spoke to me around me at the time. There are lots of different places where mentorship exists for women leaders, but I think it's important that we also look at different forms of mentorship. So there's mentorship in terms of providing sometimes lifelong support for somebody, of getting them not to go with all the answers, but to seek and find ways for connecting, for bouncing ideas off of, for dealing with the tremendous pressures and burdens that we have as women. There's sponsorship, which is really important for young women in particular that are just starting out, that are trying to get doors open for them, because we know how hard it is to get those opportunities. So mentorship and sponsorship. And then there's coaching, which to me is very technical in terms of really building specific capacities. So when I look at those three things combined, if I were a women leader right now, I would be asking myself, what am I really looking for? Am I looking for coaching on something very specific? Am I looking for somebody who can guide me and help me in, at the particular moment that I'm in with my journey as a leader? Am I looking for somebody to open doors for me and create opportunities to meet new people and to find resources for me? And when I'm clear about that, then it's easier to go out and find it. And that's something that I hope we can continue to support through the Coady as well in various ways. I would also just say it's important that we are valuing the time of mentors, because again, this comes as another one of these things that we do over and above our regular jobs that is not, there's no money attached to it. And yet we have tremendous value, and we can also, as mentors, see the value in it. We often, as mentors, learn just as much as the mentee does. So the relationship is really important, and the mutual trust and respect is really important as well. I'm sorry, I'm not going to jump into every question here. I'm going to just close this, because if you permit me, I'd like to share a few final slides. Okay, so where we were was we just had some conversations in different groups, and I wish we would have had more time for it. You always want more time for things. I want to reflect on something that actually would require its own webinar, to be honest. And if there's enough interest in this, we could actually talk about that as a next step for people. But I think we need to also remember that as women leaders, we're often dealing with microaggression. So this is a form of violence. It's perhaps not always the most severe kind of GBV or gender-based violence, but it's also something that in this moment of backslides, and I heard that a few times, both in our group as well as in plenary, the backslides that we're facing right now, one of the things that is so damaging for us is the fact that we are often facing microaggression, and we don't even know necessarily what those are, or it's just become such normalized behavior in our world, particularly as women or as other historically marginalized or oppressed groups. And so I think that when I'm asked a lot lately about, well, how can we address it? What can we do to combat it? And I've started to put together a briefing note that focuses in on microaggression that we face when we're working in an organization, and what are the scenarios that we can take, and what are the steps we can take to address it. Microaggression that we face in our communities as we're trying to do good work, and yet we're constantly being, bombarded with things that make us question our abilities, or set us backwards, or devalue what we're providing the community as community leaders. And the third area that I think is really really important to acknowledge is the level of a microaggression in social media and in technology spaces. And we see that not just with political leaders, like, I can think of any number of women leaders here in Canada that have made choices about stepping away from politics because it just became so bad, online as well as in person, that they were, the microaggressions then started to really move into a much bigger space of security threat. I think that I worry that even as we are burning out, or we're thinking about all the work we have to do, that on top of it, we're facing these issues. And whether it's institutional, whether it's in our communities, or whether it's bigger than that, or whether it's on social media, the 5 things that I think are essential that we need to be addressing and considering is these things that I've just put on the slide here, about starting to get better at naming the behavior in the moment, calling it out in the moment, not doing it in a way that's attacking, but recognizing that microaggression is happening in that moment against you or against somebody else that you're with, and naming it, and not letting it become unaddressed. The second is that we have to start and particularly as women, but not just, setting expectations and boundaries about what's appropriate behavior when you're working with me, or when we're collaborating, and what's not. The third is making sure that we are building allyship so that we are not alone. And much of the women's leadership models will talk about the importance of collective, of always going in as a collective and never leaving somebody on their own to be dealing in these very patriarchal spaces. The fourth is, and it sounds so obvious, and it's not meant to be just a discussion about self-care, but how you position yourself to protect your time and your energy and your own mental health, and recognizing that at some points that it is not a weakness of yours to be stepping back from the good work you do and creating space to recharge your battery, particularly if you're dealing with microaggressions. And finally, we need to stop letting it be normalized. And this comes back to inequality in general. And with those inequalities, in whatever forms they take, often microaggressions, they look innocent enough. I didn't mean it this way. I didn't mean, this was a joke, this was whatever. And then it quickly scales into something much bigger. And we cannot allow this to be normalized just because in the past nobody has spoken up. And we can also, and where I really admire women is particularly among some of our youth who, if some of us as parents have done our job, are not accepting that anymore. And we need to support them in that. And we need to also say ourselves, yes, that is not a normal way of working with us, and we need to move it forward. We need to move forward from it. So I raise this because it continues to be an area where women, on top of all of the other challenges, have to address on a day-to-day basis, and sometimes much, much worse. I am very fortunate to be living in a relatively calm community here, where microaggression exists for sure, but at least I don't have to worry about losing my life when I walk home at the end of the day. And I hope the same for the rest of the people in my community. So if that's of interest to you, then let's definitely pick up the conversation, and let's build that out a little bit more and talk about what are those strategies that we can be building together. Let me end on something more positive, because we've talked a lot about the heaviness of the world, and it feels like there's so much to be done. It feels like there is a lot that we carry if we care about the world that we are leaving also for the next generations to come. So where do we find hope? Now at Coady, we really feel that it's important that that we are actually conveying hope, even in the darkest of times. And I want to share with you a couple thoughts on hope. One is that, yes, the world's on fire, but that's exactly sometimes the kind of moment where hope is born. And that's not meaning to be to be naive in any way, but it's about saying that hope is a discipline, it's a muscle that we have to build, and it's a strategy. And we have a lot of material for hope than it maybe sometimes look like when we're looking at the news day in, day out, as I'm doing right now. So let me share with you that hope comes from you. It comes from you because if you're on this call today, I'm pretty certain that you care about the community that you live in, and you care about equality and rights and equity and justice for all. And you are one of those helpers that is moving things forward, and you're everywhere. And so you're stepping up, and you already see the pattern. And we've talked about examples where we see it happening in the world right now, where you're building local economies, even when you're in a war zone. Youth are organizing on climate resilient work. I mean, what a model of movement building that they're demonstrating in this modern era. Communities are continuing to build and create mutual aid networks. I see that locally right here in my small town in Nova Scotia, and I see it globally right after disasters and in terms of disaster management and mitigation as well. And most importantly, and to combat the issue of percentages of women at the highest levels, I see women really stepping in at the local level, at communities, especially where institutions are failing. So we're not giving up on each other. And I think that's a really important piece to remember, that we are building, from our agency, we are moving forward, and we are creating also space to connect rather than to isolate. We're building in the present and in the future and not waiting for it. So with that, I mean, that's where I'm going to end my moment, or my conversation, is continue to build on those pockets of hope that you're seeing around you. You don't have to do everything, and we don't have to solve every problem. But when we look collectively at what is possible, and we look at really pushing, to be in those leadership spaces, to be making the bigger decisions, to be moving away from this very polarized and conflict heavy state that we're in the world. Together we can do it, and together anything is possible. So thank you very much for this. I want to thank everybody who came out today, and to thank all of my my community navigators, all of whom could have easily done this presentation and probably would have done it 10 times better. I'm so grateful to work with all of you. I'm hoping we can have further conversations like this in the very near future. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a great International Women's Week.